But first, the more you see the footage of these violent protests coming out of scores of states in the United States, the more we should be thankful of where we live, good old Australia. We have not and will not see this kind of mayhem and chaos in our lifetimes, thankfully, touch wood. It's never been in the Australian DNA, and we don't have the history or that kind of population which leads to a widespread degree of anger and hatred. And America, of course, has a long cultural history of racial division and various political extremists who antagonise these situations immensely. A situation which theoretically centres on the homicide of young black American George Floyd, but couldn't have come at a worse time. The outrage over Floyd's callous treatment has been further fuelled by the lengthy lockdown of Americans due to COVID-19 and the loss of millions and millions of jobs. The population is frustrated, they're out of work, they're scared, and as they lash out, we've watched mass looting and the destruction of businesses in at least 24 states. That's not protesting. Today, Donald Trump, who'd been literally bunkered down under the White House, stood up to say that he would be the president of law and order.
America is founded upon the rule of law. It is the foundation of our prosperity, our freedom, and our very way of life. But where there is no law, there is no opportunity. Where there is no justice, there is no liberty. Where there is no safety, there is no future. We must never give in to anger or hatred. If malice or violence reigns, then none of us is free.
That's Trump desperately trying to take control, probably could have done it 24 hours ago, and trying to take control not just physically but also politically, because he's getting awfully close to this election. And there are plenty of confused voters out there who are blaming him for the virus blowout and the death of George Floyd. The haters will use whatever they can get their hands on to blame him. Now, the victim's brother, though, tried his best today to quell the violence and destruction.
Do this peacefully. Please. I know he would not want y'all to be doing this. And I'm not saying the people here, whoever's doing it, relax.
You'd like to think that after 7 days now of protests, and half of those under curfew, this must soon peter out. But the history of highly publicised violence and death of black Americans at the hands of police still remain in the minds of protesters. The name Rodney King, for instance, was featured frequently in chants and posters on the West Coast. The events and fallout are strikingly similar. It was 6 days of protests, including the death of 63 people, thankfully not as many this time, before the National Guard, the Army, Marines, were called in, which quickly ended the chaos. You would hope this will end just as quickly. But Trump is at war with Democrat governors and mayors who are ignoring the call to bring in the heavy armoury. It's a nation out of work, out of patience and out of answers on the issue of black deaths. We should never take for granted what differing attitudes and culture dominate here in Australia, because while we still have disagreements and angry conflict at times over Indigenous issues, we don't have anarchy. And maybe that's because we've worked so hard here to remove tyranny. And as the English jurist Jeremy Bentham once said, tyranny and anarchy are never far apart.